The scent of stale coffee and sizzling bacon grease was the perfume of Chloe's life. It clung to her clothes, her hair, her very skin. She moved through the afternoon rush at Dolly's diner with an economy of motion that bordered on art. 2 plates balanced on one arm, a coffee pot in the other hand, a smile fixed on her face that didn't quite reach her tired eyes. She was 20 years old, and she knew the geography of this place better than the lines on her own palm. Every cracked vinyl booth, every sticky patch on the linoleum, every customer with their predictable order. The phone rang, a shrill, insistent sound that cut through the diner's clatter. Chloe snagged the receiver between her shoulder and ear while pouring a refill for a trucker in booth 4. "Dolly's, you got it, we got it," she recited, the words automatic. A voice on the other end silenced the practice script in her throat. It was a man's voice, low and smooth as polished river stone, but with an undercurrent of something hard and cold. There was no background noise, just a profound, unnerving silence. "I require a takeout order." It wasn't a request. It was a statement of fact. "Okay, what can I get for you?" Chloe said, grabbing a pen and a notepad. He began to list items, each one precise and complicated. The steak, medium rare, but seared for precisely 90 seconds on each side. The fries, unsalted, cooked in fresh oil. The salad, dressing on the side, but the dressing had to be a vinaigrette made with a specific brand of olive oil she knew for a fact Dolly's didn't carry. The list went on, growing more detailed and demanding with each item. He wanted 12 complete meals, each with their own infuriating modifications. "Sir," Chloe interrupted, her patience fraying like the hem of her apron. "We're a diner, not a 5-star restaurant. We don't have half of this stuff." "Then acquire it," the voice said, flat and devoid of emotion. Chloe's jaw tightened. She glanced at the clock. She had 2 more tables to turn before her shift ended, a mountain of side work to do, and a bus to catch. She didn't have time for this. "Look, I can get you 12 steak dinners with fries and a side salad. That's the best I can do." A pause stretched across the line, heavy and deliberate. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped even lower, a quiet rumble of menace that made the hairs on her arms stand up. "You're not listening. I said I require it. The order will be as I specified, and you will deliver it." "We don't deliver," she snapped, her professionalism finally cracking under the strain. This guy, with his voice like cold silk and his impossible demands, was the last straw on a very long, very exhausting day. "You do now." Something inside Chloe just broke. She was tired of being polite to rude people, tired of smiling when she wanted to scream, tired of feeling like a machine built to serve. "No," she said, the word a small, sharp stone thrown into the unnerving quiet on his end of the line. "We don't." And she hung up. She slammed the phone back into its cradle, the plastic cracking under the force. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, a mix of adrenaline and terror. You didn't hang up on customers. It was rule number 1. But he wasn't a customer. He was a problem. A voice. She took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and went back to her tables, determined to forget the entire conversation. 10 minutes later, the world outside the diner's plate glass window went dark. One by one, they pulled up to the curb, black SUVs, tinted to an impenetrable sheen, silent as panthers. They didn't park so much as they occupied the street, a fleet of obsidian monoliths that blocked out the afternoon sun. 1, 2, 3, she counted 10 of them. The entire diner fell silent. Forks hovered halfway to mouths. Conversations died. Everyone stared. The door of the lead vehicle opened. A man emerged. He was tall, impossibly so, and wore a suit so perfectly tailored it looked less like clothing and more like a second skin. It was charcoal gray, the fabric catching the dim light in a way that spoke of obscene expense. He moved with a chilling grace, a predatory stillness that made the bustling city street feel like his private stage. He walked toward the diner. The glass door swung open, the little bell above it chiming a cheerful, utterly inappropriate welcome. He stepped inside, and the temperature of the room dropped by 10 degrees. He didn't look around. He didn't need to. His eyes, dark and sharp as obsidian chips, found her immediately. Chloe felt the weight of his gaze like a physical touch, pinning her where she stood behind the counter. He walked toward her, his expensive leather shoes making no sound on the worn floor. He moved like the room owed him space, and the air itself seemed to part for him. He stopped on the other side of the counter, the polished formica a flimsy barrier between them. She could see him clearly now. The sharp line of his jaw, the faint, silvery scar that cut through one of his eyebrows, the immaculate white cuffs of his shirt peeking out from his suit jacket. His hands rested on the counter, long-fingered and perfectly manicured, yet they looked capable of unspeakable things. A scent drifted from him, something clean and sharp, cedarwood and cold smoke. It was the voice from the phone, given form. "You hung up on me," he said. It wasn't a question. His voice was even quieter in person, a low murmur that forced her to lean in slightly to hear it, a trick that was both intimate and threatening. Chloe swallowed, her throat suddenly dry. "We were busy." The lie was thin and pathetic, and they both knew it. His eyes didn't leave hers. A flicker of something that wasn't quite amusement crossed his features. "You will pack the order." As I described it, he slid a thick stack of $100 bills onto the counter. It was enough money to cover the diner's rent for 3 months. "And then you will bring it to me." He placed a black card next to the money. An address was embossed on it in stark silver lettering. A penthouse downtown. I can't leave my shift," she stammered, her mind racing for an escape that didn't exist. "Your shift is over," he stated, his gaze flicking to her boss, Manny, who was hiding behind the milkshake machine looking pale. Manny gave a frantic little nod. Of course. This wasn't a request. It was a restructuring of her reality. He wasn't just a rude customer. He was something else entirely, something powerful and dangerous that had just walked into her world of coffee refills and greasy spoons. The event that chained them together wasn't a choice she made. It was a consequence that had arrived in 10 black SUVs. He turned to leave, his presence receding like a tide, leaving a chill in its wake. At the door, he paused and looked back at her. 7 o'clock, he said, his voice a silken threat. "Do not be late, Chloe." He knew her name. He had looked at her name tag. But the way he said her name differently than anyone else had. He said it like he owned it, like it was something he had just decided to claim. And as he disappeared into the tinted anonymity of his car, Chloe knew, with a certainty that settled cold and heavy in her stomach, that her life as a waitress was over. She was his problem to solve now. The taxi ride to the address on the card felt like a journey to another planet. Chloe sat in the back, the bags of hastily acquired, ridiculously expensive groceries on the seat beside her. Manny had practically thrown the money at her, telling her to just do whatever the man said. The food order sat in insulated bags, smelling of steak and fear. She had cooked it herself in the diner's kitchen, her hands shaking as she tried to remember his litany of impossible instructions. The building was a spear of glass and steel that pierced the downtown skyline. A doorman who looked like he could bench press a car eyed her uniform with suspicion until she presented the black card. His demeanor changed instantly. He bowed his head slightly. "Right this way, miss." The elevator was a silent, mirrored box that shot upward with dizzying speed. It opened directly into the penthouse. There was no foyer, no hallway. Just an expanse of polished concrete floors, floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing a breathtaking, panoramic view of the city, and a startling lack of furniture. It was less a home and more a gallery, cold, minimalist, and immaculate. And there he was, Kwon Ji-han. He stood by the window, a silhouette against the glittering cityscape. He had removed his suit jacket, and the white of his shirt was stark against the encroaching darkness outside. He turned as she entered, his movements fluid and controlled. "You are 4 minutes late," he said. "Traffic," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. She walked over to a large, empty marble island in the center of the room and began to unpack the food. He didn't help. He watched. He made her wait, his silence a tool he wielded with surgical precision. She set out the 12 containers, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. He walked over and opened one, inspecting the contents with a critical eye. He picked up a single, unsalted fry and ate it. His expression was unreadable. "It is adequate," he finally pronounced. This became her new routine. Every evening at 7, she would arrive with his meticulously prepared dinner. He would make her wait in that vast, silent apartment while he ate. They rarely spoke. The silence between them was not empty. It was a living thing, thick with unspoken questions and palpable tension. In that silence, she began to notice things. The way he held his chopsticks with an artist's delicacy. The precise, almost ritualistic way he arranged his food. The faint, silvery scar near his temple that she wondered about constantly. And the photograph on his desk, always turned face down. One evening, the air in the penthouse was different. It was charged, heavy with a violence that had just passed. When she entered, Jihan was standing at his desk, his back to her. His shoulders were rigid. He was staring at the photograph, but this time it was face up. It was a woman with a bright, beautiful smile and eyes that looked kind. He didn't seem to hear Chloe enter. He reached out a hand, his fingers hovering just above the glass of the frame, not quite touching it. A profound sadness emanated from him, a wound so deep it seemed to suck the air from the room. That was it. That was the crack in his armor. The one vulnerability he carried. He must have sensed her presence, because he flinched, his hand dropping. He turned, and for a split second, his eyes were not the cold, calculating eyes of a predator. They were haunted. Lost. He quickly snatched the photo and placed it face down, his composure sliding back into place like a mask. But she had seen it, a woman he had failed to protect. The danger she had only sensed became real a week later. As she was leaving his building, heading toward the parking garage to catch a cab, two men stepped out of the shadows. They were nothing like Jihan's men. They were sloppy, their clothes cheap, their menace crude and loud. "You're the delivery girl," one of them sneered, blocking her path. Chloe's blood ran cold. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't lie," the other one said, stepping closer. He smelled of stale cigarettes and cheap beer. "You bring him his food every night. What does he talk about? Who does he meet with?" She backed away, her purse clutched in her hand. "I just drop off the food. That's it." They cornered her against a concrete pillar. One of them reached for her arm. Before his fingers could touch her, there was a blur of motion from the deeper shadows. Two of Jihan's men materialized from nowhere. They moved with a silent, brutal efficiency that was terrifying to watch. It was over in seconds. No guns, just the sickening sounds of bone breaking and bodies hitting the pavement. Then, Jihan himself stepped out of the darkness. He hadn't sent his men. He had come himself. He walked over to the two groaning figures on the ground, his expression cold and disgusted. He didn't spare them a second glance. His eyes found Chloe. He took in her wide eyes, her trembling hands. "This is over," he said, his voice flat. "It is no longer safe for you." He pulled out a checkbook, wrote a number with several zeros, and tore it out, holding it out to her. "Take this. Leave the city. Forget you ever met me." This was her chance. Her exit. The smart thing to do was to take the money and run as far and as fast as she could. But she looked at the men on the ground, then back at his face. They had seen her. They knew who she was. Running felt like painting a target on her back. And then there was him, the man with the haunted eyes and the photograph of the smiling woman. She made a choice. "No," she said, pushing the check back toward him. "They'll find me. If I disappear, they'll know you told me something." She lifted her chin, meeting his gaze directly. "I'm safer where you can see me." He stared at her, his dark eyes searching her face. He was seeing something he didn't expect. Not fear, not greed. He was seeing a strange, stubborn kind of courage she didn't even know she possessed. He stepped closer, into her space, the sterile light of the garage casting sharp shadows across his face. The air was thick with the smell of concrete and blood. "You are not like them," he said, his voice a low whisper. It wasn't a compliment. It was an observation. A dangerous truth. The space between them crackled with an energy she couldn't name. He held her gaze for a moment too long, and in that moment, she knew she had stepped off a cliff, and there was no going back. She had chosen to stay. Her life shrank to the size of the penthouse. Jihan declared it was for her safety, but it felt like a prison, albeit a luxurious one. The view of the city became the bars of her cage. She was no longer a waitress delivering food. She was a permanent fixture, a ghost in his minimalist world. The forced proximity was absolute now, a constant, low-grade hum of tension that vibrated in the air between them. He worked from a sleek, dark wood desk, taking calls in a language she didn't understand, his voice a calm, lethal weapon. She read books on a sterile white sofa, always aware of his presence in the room. The attack came on a Tuesday. It was raining, the water streaking down the panoramic windows like gray tears. The betrayal was as quiet and sudden as a heart attack. One of his own men, a guard named Park who sometimes brought her a cup of tea, disabled the private elevator's security codes. 3 assassins, dressed in black, silent as wraiths, slipped into the apartment. Chaos erupted. Jihan moved with a speed that was inhuman. He was not a man in a suit anymore. He was a weapon. The first assassin went down with a knife that seemed to appear in Jihan's hand from nowhere. The second met his end against the sharp corner of the marble island. But the third was clever. He used the fight as a diversion, flanking Jihan while he was engaged. Chloe saw it happen in slow motion. The glint of steel. The third man raising his gun, aiming for Jihan's exposed back. There was no time to scream, no time to think. Her body moved before her mind could catch up. She grabbed a heavy, crystal vase from a side table, one of the few decorative objects in the entire apartment, and threw it with all her might. It shattered against the wall just inches from the assassin's head. The explosive sound and spray of glass and water was enough. The man flinched, his aim faltering for a single, crucial second. It was all the time Jihan needed. He spun, his movements a deadly dance, and the threat was neutralized. Silence descended, broken only by the sound of their harsh breathing and the rain drumming against the glass. Jihan stood amidst the wreckage, his chest rising and falling. His eyes found hers across the room. He saw her, standing there with her hand still outstretched, trembling. He saw what she had done. She had saved him. In the aftermath, 2 of the assassins were dead. The third, the one she had distracted, was alive, along with Park, the traitor. They were bound to chairs in the center of the room. Jihan questioned Park, his voice a low, terrifying monotone. The man was defiant, spitting curses. Jihan produced a pistol, the click of the safety being released unnaturally loud in the quiet room. He was about to execute the man. Chloe saw his jaw tighten, a muscle twitching in his cheek. He glanced at her, a flicker of hesitation in his eyes. He didn't want her to see this part of his world. The traitor, Park, saw the hesitation. He saw her. He twisted in his chair, a sneer on his bloody face, and spat a vile, racist slur at her. Something hot and dark flooded Chloe's veins. It wasn't fear. It was rage.
Pure unadulterated fury.
Without a second thought, she bent down and picked up the gun dropped by one of the dead assassins. The metal was heavy and cold in her hand. She didn't point it at the traitor.
She pointed it at Jihan.
Her hand was shaking, but her voice was eerily calm. Let me. Jihan froze. He stared at her, at the gun in her hand, at the fire in her eyes. He saw that she wasn't asking to kill the man. She was telling him that she was not a fragile doll to be shielded. She was telling him that she was in this world now, and she would not be a bystander. She had crossed a line in her own mind, a line she could never uncross. He slowly walked toward her. He didn't try to snatch the weapon. He gently placed his hand over hers, his fingers curling around her knuckles and the cold steel of the gun. No, he said, his voice soft. He carefully eased the weapon from her grasp, but he understood. The moment hung between them, a silent acknowledgement. He dealt with the traitors himself, his actions quick and final, but the image of her holding that gun was seared into his mind. Later, after his men had come and gone, leaving the penthouse sterile and silent once more, they were alone. He was tending to a long, shallow cut on her arm from a shard of flying glass. His touch was shockingly gentle, his clinical focus a strange form of intimacy. You should have run, he said, his eyes on her skin as he cleaned the wound. I know, she whispered, staring at the wall. He stopped, his fingers still against her arm. The warmth of his touch was a stark contrast to the coldness of the room. Why didn't you? She finally forced herself to look at him, to meet his dark, searching gaze. The lie she'd been telling herself for weeks fell away, useless and transparent. I told myself it was about survival, she confessed, her voice barely audible over the sound of her own heart. I was lying to myself. It wasn't a declaration of love. It was something far more dangerous. It was an admission that she was drawn to this life, to him. An admission that she was no longer the girl who worked at the diner. She was someone else now, someone forged in his fire. The enemy, a rival faction led by a man named Choi, grew desperate.
They couldn't get to Jihan.
So they went after his only perceived weakness. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. It was a single image. A photograph of her mother, laughing as she watered the petunias on her front porch. It was a normal, beautiful picture, except for the red crosshairs of a sniper's scope centered directly on her mother's heart. The message was brutally clear. This was no longer just Jihan's war. They had brought it to her doorstep. The stakes were no longer about her survival. They were about her family. Jihan saw the color drain from her face. He took the phone from her trembling hand. His expression, as he looked at the picture, transformed into something she had never seen before, a cold, absolute rage that was terrifying in its stillness. He was going to end this. All of it. He planned the strike with lethal precision. A meeting Choi had arranged at a high-end restaurant in Koreatown. It was a trap, but Jihan was going to spring it on his own terms. He intended to leave Chloe locked in the penthouse's panic room.
She refused.
He'll be expecting you, she said, her voice shaking but firm.
His men.
His guns. But he won't be expecting me.
You are not going, Jihan said.
It was an order. I am, she countered, stepping right up to him, forcing him to look down at her. I used to pack takeout orders for that restaurant's kitchen staff. I know the back ways. I know the delivery schedules. I know the head chef has a gambling problem and leaves the kitchen service door propped open for his bookie on Thursday nights. She took a breath. Today is Thursday. He stared at her, his calculated plans colliding with her real-world knowledge. She wasn't asking for permission. Her family was on the line. She was going with or without him. The restaurant was a maze of steam, shouting, and the clang of steel. Chloe led Jihan and two of his most trusted men through the greasy, chaotic back entrance she had described. The firefight, when it started in the main dining room, was sudden and brutal. Jihan's plan had been to corner Choi, but Choi had more men than anticipated. They were pinned down behind the bar. Jihan was a whirlwind of deadly grace, but he was outnumbered. Chloe, hidden in the pantry, watched as one of Choi's men got a clear shot lined up. Her mind raced, not with fear, but with a cold, clear focus. She couldn't use a gun, but she knew kitchens. She saw the industrial-sized bags of flour stacked against the wall and the high-pressure gas line for the deep fryers. Acting on pure, desperate intelligence, she ripped open two of the 50-pound bags, throwing clouds of fine white powder into the air. Then, she grabbed a heavy wrench and smashed the pilot light on a nearby stove, sending a shower of sparks into the flour-filled air. The resulting explosion was a concussive boom, a flash of white fire that was more noise and force than deadly heat. It was a dust explosion, a trick of chemistry she'd read about once. It threw the kitchen into chaos, blinding everyone with thick, white smoke and setting off every fire alarm and sprinkler in the building. The diversion was all Jihan needed. In the confusion, his men gained the upper hand. The fight was over. In the quiet aftermath, amidst the dripping water from the sprinklers and the settling white dust, he found her. She was huddled in the pantry, covered in flour, shaking but unharmed. He walked toward her, ignoring his men, ignoring the bodies, ignoring everything but her. He stopped a few feet away, his suit soaked and ruined, a cut bleeding freely on his cheek. He just looked at her, and for the first time, his mask was completely gone. My father told me that loyalty was a currency, he said, his voice rough with emotion and exhaustion. Something you purchase with money or fear. He took a step closer. He was wrong. It is a debt. He reached out and gently, reverently, touched her face, his thumb brushing away a smudge of flour from her cheek. His touch was a brand. And I, he said, his dark eyes holding hers, am in yours. It was more than an admission. It was his soul, laid bare.
He owed her his life.
He was acknowledging her not as a liability or a possession, but as the one who had saved him. The cost to their victory was the life she'd left behind. The diner, the simple exhaustion, the quiet hope for a normal future, it was all gone, turned to ash. The cost for him was a vulnerability he had sworn he would never allow again. They drove away in one of his cars, leaving the chaos behind them. The city lights blurred into long streaks of color through the armored glass. Chloe leaned her head against the cool window, the adrenaline finally draining away, leaving a bone-deep weariness in its place. He sat beside her in the darkness, silent, watching the road ahead. Then, without a word, he reached across the space between them and took her hand. His grip was strong, possessive, a silent claim. But it was also a promise, an anchor in the violent new world they now shared. She didn't pull away. She turned her hand in his, lacing her fingers through his. It was not a surrender. It was a choice, a conscious, deliberate acceptance. They were not two separate people anymore, a waitress and a mafia boss. They were a singular entity, bound by violence and loyalty, heading into an uncertain darkness, together.